Good morning. Here we are again. Sitting here, hanging out in the morning, drinking coffee. Up and at 'em, everybody. Democracy's on the line. Sure as hell hope that this does not become a regular thing. I would much rather spend my mornings drinking coffee in silent contemplation. And by that I mean in my office doing work. I would much rather be doing that than having to talk about whether or not the election of the United States of America is being stolen. And I have to tell you, I don't know about the rest of you. Good morning. I can really do without the President of the United States of America going on one. I would. David Kelly just claimed this live stream, which, according to United States American presidential election logic, it means he now owns it. That means I just have to step aside. You know, I said this yesterday on Twitter. I tweeted this. I was like, really bad strategy by the Biden campaign not to just claim every state and just be done and just say, you know what, we claim all of them, done. You know, we got to talk about what happened last night in Arizona and what's probably going to happen today, and how this thing is it's ratcheting up and it's growing more and more dangerous with every passing minute. But before we do, we have to talk about how pathetic this coup is. It doesn't mean the coup won't work. I just want to let everybody know that. Like, I'm not telling you at this point that like we're out of the water, because my God, we are not out of the water right now. We're neck deep in this water. Maybe even chin deep. Maybe it's a little bit above the neck. Maybe it's just a little bit. But it's such a sad, pathetic coup. Whew. Trump getting on Twitter and just claiming states is, you know, if it wasn't so terrifying what we were dealing with, it would be really funny. Really, really funny. Like it's a really pathetic coup. And then today, and again, it's like he can't decide whether he wants to stop the count, go forward with the count, recount. Let's just say the intellectual rigor at the heart of this coup is not strong, which is shocking considering the people who are trying to pull it off, because they are just top notch all the way around, the best people, the smartest people. But watching, by the way, I just want to say, watching Eric Trump really come to the forefront of this thing is a lot. You know, I thought Don Jr. would be the one who would be definitely leading this coup. You know, getting up in cameras and looking like both he hasn't slept in days, and his eyes getting really dilated and glassy. I would have I would have bet that Don Jr. would have been the one leading the coup for his dad. You know, it feels like it's his destiny to be the person who tries to prove to his dad how much he should love him and how much he loves him by pulling off a coup. It feels like him sort of begging America to go ahead and get his dad reelected. Meanwhile, while his dad just pretends it's not happening. That seems like it's the evolutionary peak of Don Jr. But Don Jr. has just hung out and retweeted memes, and also, you want to talk about how ridiculous this coup is, just screamed out, "Somebody do something!" While James O'Keefe, and I assume Jacob Wool, is somewhere doing something, breaking some law, and Don Jr. is just like, "Do something." Meanwhile, Eric has really upped his game, just going out and saying they're stealing the election, they're engaging in fraud. Like Eric decided that this was his moment. So kudos to him for helping his dad try and carry out a coup. Meanwhile, Rudy Giuliani just wants there to be a coup so everyone stops talking about the Borat thing. What a What a moment. I said this yesterday too. I never thought that fascism was going to be this weird and this stupid. But I was studying the Third Reich, and I was studying Nazi Germany, and like that's a weird thing. Like that little inner circle around Hitler, it gets really really bizarre and sycophantic. So maybe I shouldn't have been so surprised that it was going to be so stupid and so weird. So this morning was a lot. Trump obviously started yesterday with the lawsuits and these sort of oh, we're absolutely lucky there's someone competent. It doesn't mean it's not going to work out. It doesn't mean that we're not going to, have our votes absolutely thrown out because of Donald Trump. But I have to tell you that if he was the least bit more competent, whew, whew, we'd be in real trouble. If he could just simply like go out and speak off a teleprompter and not go on weird rants about boaters and Pavarotti and how he wants to go out in the audience and kiss all the women and all of the men. Like if Trump could avoid all of that stuff, we would be in a whole different situation right now. Because I have to tell you, a lot of our media would just lap that stuff up as long as he went out and just saluted the flag and talked about American exceptionalism and wasn't completely and bizarre and bizarrely incompetent. Like this would be a whole different conversation. But here we are. It's becoming increasingly obvious that Joe Biden has won this election. Yeah, if he was Tom Cotton, this would be a different conversation. But that's the other part about it. I keep thinking about all that is it's like you can do a pretty good impersonation of Donald Trump's strongman tactics and authoritarian tactics, but there's that special weirdness that takes it over the bar. So it's hard because in order to go full Trump, and by the way, to have like churches running marathon praying sessions where they're calling for battle against demonic confederacies and for spirits from South America and Africa, which that in and of itself deserves a couple of books to be written about it. I told you all about the call to the Shining City. I told everybody, and they're like, "Oh, that's not real. That's not real. There's not a neo-Confederate white evangelical cult dedicated to Donald Trump." Woo. Woo. But yeah, it's becoming increasingly clear that Joe Biden has taken this election. And by the way, I just want to point out like how disgusting it is that we're looking at him probably winning the popular vote by 7 million, more votes than any other candidate in history. And here we are sweating out a couple of districts here and there. It's disgusting. This electoral college turns out isn't great for democracy. Hey, thanks for buying American Rule. Good for you. I really appreciate that. Really, really appreciate that. What's going to happen right now is we're in the desperate stage. And, Donald Trump today yelling about stopping the count or recounting or whatever, no ballots after this will be counted or whatever it is that he's on today. It's emblematic of a bigger thing that is taking place. Like I assume some of you, I was watching the coverage from Arizona last night, and the Trump supporters were gathered outside of this counting place, and a lot of them were carrying guns, and on top of that, they were trying to get into the counting place. I mean, it's pure fascism. That's what that is, and basically, it's the idea that they're going to go in there. Going to go in there and intimidate people and keep them from either finishing the count or influencing how that count will go. Again, by the way, good to see law enforcement just, hanging out and being like, hey, these people have a constitutional right, as opposed to, I don't know, tear gassing them, breaking their arms, throwing them in the street, accidentally shooting them or tasering them. Really weird how that turns out. But it's a preview, and I want to talk. I think we're going to win Georgia too. I think Georgia's going to go for Biden. I agree with that, and I think we're going to have two special elections. I think we're going to see the runoff in the special election. I think we're going to see a runoff between Purdue and Ossoff. And by the way, I have to tell you, as somebody who lives in Georgia, I am already exhausted by this special election that hasn't even been set up yet. The money that is going to flood into this state to run ads is it's a little exhausting. So I got pine cones falling off everywhere. I got big giant pine trees, and every time one of these pine cones falls off, I mean, it sounds like a cinder block falling to the ground. I have a hammock, and over the summer I was hanging out in the hammock, and I had a pine cone fall, and it hit me in the head, and it was rough. Anyway, that's what we're doing. We're drinking coffee today, talking about fascism, talking about pine cones falling. Here we are, everybody. Welcome to Have a Coffee with Yates Sexton, and dear God, please don't let this be a regular thing. But this thing in Arizona, I think, is really telling. I'm working on a piece about this right now, and I talked about it. I did a thread a while back. If you're interested in it, I retweeted it last night. We have a growing situation, and by the way, and I don't know if y'all have heard this, but Trump apparently called up Rupert Murdoch and was just absolutely livid that Fox News gave Arizona to Biden, and this was inevitable. This has been in the works for a while. Fox News served its purpose for the Republican Party and for Donald Trump. I mean, it started, of course, with Trump, going on there and doing his regular, I would say punditry, but it was more just a guy who didn't understand politics being given a national forum to just spew absolute bullshit. I don't know if that was the title of his segment. I don't know if in the Fox News offices that's what was written up on the dry erase board, but that's what it was. And of course, that made it seem like for whatever reason he was supposed to speak about politics, and it made him seem like a politician. And also, he did this thing where he didn't have any responsibilities when it came to governing, and so he could just give his opinions and there were no consequences, right? He would say, oh, I would make it, I would figure this out very easy, very strongly, very quickly, very bigly. And he would just say, oh, the president's a loser, he's doing it all wrong, he's stupid. And so as a result, I mean, that's Trump's entire political ideology summed up. And what happened was that obviously he fused with Fox News. One of the reasons he won the nomination in 2016 was because he was the only candidate who was willing to live in the Fox News reality. For the longest time, Republicans always went on Fox News, and they always used Fox News. They always, they dabbled in that alternate reality in order to speak to voters and to motivate them to send money and to support them in elections and to keep them in a constant state of paranoia and fear. But they didn't believe it. That was the whole thing that happened at Fox News. It was a tool. And that's how Roger Ailes set this thing up. Is he knew that if he could create this little alternate reality over at Fox News, he could go ahead and propagandize an entire voting base and, to put Republicans over here to where like they never did anything wrong and they never suffered consequences. This was fallout, of course, from Richard Nixon and Watergate. Well, eventually what ends up happening, and I talk about this a lot, about how reality is malleable. What ends up happening is that the Republican Party, because they had this alternate reality that they used for electoral viability, because they couldn't win elections otherwise, they started merging with it. They started believing it. Like if you tell the lie long enough, the lie just sort of becomes your reality. And that's actually what we saw in 2009, 2010, 2011 with the rise of the Tea Party, which we'll get to in a second, because that's one of the reasons I wanted to do this stream. So what ends up happening is that the Republicans who used Fox News as an alternate reality and knew that it was bullshit, all of a sudden their base thinks it's absolutely real, and they start electing people who believe it's real. So all of a sudden, to be a Republican, you have to live in the completely fake alternate reality that was created to keep people terrified and paranoid. Well, that reality isn't real. And so when you start electing people who believe it, all of a sudden the Republican Party starts getting taken over by people who don't understand that this whole thing is a big giant grift and a big giant propaganda tool. So the Tea Party actually starts to take over the Republican Party in the aughts, and all of a sudden you have an entire party that is staffed by people who cannot tell the difference between reality and propaganda. And who better for that than Donald Trump, who is a constant revolving door of not understanding the difference between his own bullshit and reality. He's lost in it. It's like if anybody's ever, by the way, I'm sitting here drinking out of my Kurt Vonnegut mug. It's like if you've ever read Slaughterhouse-Five. Billy Pilgrim came unstuck in time, and all of a sudden he's living in all these different times at once. Donald Trump phases in and out between his bullshit, knowing that it's a lie and thinking it's real. He's a really unwell person, and that not knowing where the bullshit stops and reality begins is the perfect embodiment of the Republican Party. So Fox News was never going to work, because what ends up happening is in the odds. All of a sudden, there have been years and years and years of Fox News alternate reality. Well, all of a sudden, Fox News becomes moderate. Try and follow me here. Fox News is far, far right. But if you tell people long enough that it's fair and balanced and that it's actually telling the truth the way that it is, and you can decide on left and right, all of a sudden, that becomes the center. The Overton window shifts, and all of a sudden, the Republican Party, in their own reality, is in the middle. That means that there's room on the left, which would be the old neoliberal type people. You know, we have like the Bushes and even Reagan, if you actually look at him on his face. Right now, Reagan would not be welcome in the Republican Party, which is weird to think about. Then all of a sudden, you have the middle, which is where like a few people sort of operate, like a Ted Cruz. And just for a second, think about that. Ted Cruz literally believes he has been ordained by God to be the savior of the human race. He's right in the middle. He's not left, he's not right. He's right in the middle. And then all of a sudden over here on the far right, which by the way, people just have an appetite for the far right, are just fascist. All of a sudden you have like these dudes who are going to like Adolf Hitler's, bunker and taking shots at that and, just screaming cry lib or whatever it is these assholes are doing. And Donald Trump. And so it keeps moving right. That's what marketing niches are all about. And we've seen this at Fox News. We've seen small movements where people at Fox News recognize that there is room on the right to build their own base, even outside of Fox News. This is what Glenn Beck was. When Glenn Beck got on there and he kept talking all these conspiracy theories about, basically calling Barack Obama the Antichrist, well, he gained a ton of support and a ton of patronage. And all of a sudden now you're in a situation where Tucker Carlson and Laura Ingraham understand that there's plenty of room for white supremacist TV. That's what they're doing. So all of a sudden, you move right, and that Overton window moves a little bit more. Fox News was never going to be the permanent home for these people. There's a reason why last night they were out there chanting Fox News sucks. They are being told right now that Fox News is part of the deep state. And by the way, you'll hear this left and right. If you follow QAnon stuff or far right movements, they'll say things. And tell me if this sounds familiar. I assume that you've heard some of this stuff before. They'll say things like, well, Fox News is like all the other networks, except for a couple of people. Hannity's okay, Tucker's okay, Laura's okay, all of that shit. So what ends up happening is that Fox News sometimes will say, well, the polls today show that Donald Trump is losing support here. And all of a sudden, Trump's like, what do you mean I'm losing support? How could you possibly show that poll? Obviously, you're biased. So all of a sudden, that cult around Trump is always, always, always going to consume anything that even supports it. Because the moment that they're given contradictory evidence, they're apostates. They're heretics. They're thrown out. And this is how orthodoxy works. If you are in a cult, you cannot even allow anyone or anything to ever speak against what you believe to be true, because it's dangerous. Cults are very fragile. That's one of the reasons why we're seeing like a real backlash right now among Trump supporters. I have to tell you, I have been seeing some stuff among Trump's base right now on social media. Shocking. Absolutely shocking stuff. So What's actually happening is Fox News, and again, I put this post up on Twitter, the thread that I reposted last night. Fox News is being pushed out, and they're always moving right. And one of the things that happened that was of note over the past couple of years is Trump has started actively saying that Fox News is different, and they've obviously moved left, and they don't support him anymore. Meanwhile, he was lusting after Kim Jong Un's state-sponsored propaganda networks. That's what they want. And you've actually seen a little bit of this where you see things like an OANN or a Breitbart are actually trying to get Trump's support so they can become the far right alternative to Fox. So Fox is just being passed through the right's digestive system, and it's going to be passed by. And they're just going to find someone who doesn't even care about anything approaching journalistic integrity. Because Fox News has to at least keep the appearance of integrity. Like, we report, you decide. They have to at least do that. And Trump and his cult, they don't want that. They want somebody who doesn't even have the beginnings of journalistic integrity. They need somebody who will just go ahead and push, what they believe and what they want. Doesn't mean Fox News is going to move left. It means that they're going to get left behind. And I have to tell you that we're looking at a real possibility that Fox News will try and play catch up, and they will try and move right. Because when they start realizing that they're going to lose a few million viewers, that's when you start having meetings up in the boardroom. You bring in some Trump supporters, give them a TV show, something like that. But I do want to talk, and this is all relevant to what I wanted to talk about today. What we saw last night with this angry mob in Arizona, I think is only the beginning. And I think that Trump's call to stop the counting today is sort of the beginning of this. Because what the right does, and this is really important for everyone to understand, and I understand that this is a really stressful time and we need to take a moment to breathe and sort of collect ourselves. They are a dwindling minority. The only reason they're behaving like this is because they understand they can't win elections anymore. And that's what fascism is. It's when a power group realizes that democracy and the normal means will not allow them to have power anymore. And I wrote, and if you haven't seen it yet, I did these American Rule lectures. Part 3, I was talking about this. When a power group starts to lose its power, what they do is they start dealing in conspiracy theories, they start attacking democratic institutions, and they start creating a mythology that they are different from everyone else and that everyone else is evil and they have to be stopped. That's what's going on in this country. So they've lost this election. But they are, and they're a dwindling minority. But they have to live within a delusion that they are the majority, the quote-unquote silent majority, whatever in the hell they're trying to peddle today. So they can't possibly let this election go forward, because if this election goes forward, I mean, my God, how many elections now have they lost the popular vote? They are not electorally viable anymore. So as a result, much like rejecting Fox News and anything that is approaching a criticism of who they are, they have to reject it. So they cannot let this election go forward. They have to stop it. It is absolutely crucial to their identity and their reality. Well, part of the reason they believe they're the majority is because of things like Fox News, but also the efforts of a lot of malevolent actors. And this is something that happened in 2010, because of course we saw that Barack Obama was elected with a mandate, and it became obvious that there was an emerging demographic and transcending demographics in America. So all of a sudden, there was a problem, which was, how do you tell the power base that they are still the majority? Well, you tell them that elections are stolen and the people they're fighting against are corrupt and they're crooked. This is an opening for not just Fox News to go after Barack Obama and someone like Donald Trump to start gaining power, but it's also an opening for malevolent actors to start putting their thumbs on the scale of public discourse. This is how you get the Tea Party. And the Tea Party wasn't an accident. There were a lot of people who didn't like Barack Obama simply, because he was black or because, they believed the propaganda that was being peddled about him. But then all of a sudden, people like the Koch brothers see an amazing opportunity. They understand that there's this white supremacist paranoia out there and that Fox has created a really fertile ground for a movement. So they create a movement. They pump a few $1 billion into creating what would become the Tea Party, which is a completely artificial, constructed movement. And the entire point of it is it's a Trojan horse. It's like, well, we want taxes to go down, and we want government responsibility, and we think that we think that Barack Obama is dangerous and he's going to try and become a dictator. Well, sure, that's part of the movement, but the main part of the movement was mainlining libertarianism in America. And so the Koch brothers, for the price of whatever they paid for the Tea Party, and they put money in it, they created these institutes that, were sort of like these, sock puppets that would go in and train them and focus on them. What ends up happening is that America starts, and particularly the right wing, starts moving much more towards libertarianism in terms of economics. So the Koch brothers get a movement that more or less makes sure that they're not going to pay taxes and deal with a lot of regulations. That's one of the reasons why the right moved further right. Well, we saw that again in the past year with the Reopen movement, which of course was paid for by people like Betsy DeVos and other billionaires who wanted to reopen the economy, plus also saw an opportunity for, if we go ahead and throw a bunch of workers at the pandemic, and also if the economy is kind of terrible and people are getting laid off, like there's an opportunity for us to not only pay people less and replace people who are making more and all of a sudden bring in people we can pay less, but maybe if we push this thing really, really hard, we can get rid of things like minimum wage or labor laws or, these things that protect laborers' health. And I have to tell you, if you gave these people their way, if they had their druthers, like your children would be in factories. That's where this whole crazy train is going. Like, it's not, and I keep saying this, it's not like factory owners and the wealthy in the early 20th century are like, God, these children, they really need an education. They had to be forced to give these things up. They had to be forced to give weekends. They had to be forced to take on a 40-hour work week. And they're still figuring out ways to get around that. That's one of the reasons why we have this, independent contractors, right? And all of a sudden we're like, hey, did you see that guy who drove the Uber for 85 hours this week? Good job. Go out and get yours, man. Pull yourself up by the bootstraps. That's what they want. And that's where they're going. And so that's like what the reform movement was about. Well, today, with Trump doing this whole, stop the count or whatever, what'll happen is it's going to be a hybrid thing. There's going to be a lot of people who are going to be activated by Trump's call to stop the count. They're going to believe deep in their heart, because they live in this alternate reality, that the election is being stolen. And all of that propaganda that they're being fed in the right-wing ecosystem, whether it's Fox or Breitbart or OANN or fake Facebook post or whatever it is, they're going to go out there because they believe that they are under attack. They have been told for decades now that the UN's going to come and take their guns, and Democrats are going to sell them out, and they're going to take their jobs, and they're going to ruin them, and their lives are at stake. Well, they'll go out, but that's not enough. There are not enough of them to make something happen. So there's going to be an opportunity for the Republican Party to send out operatives. And by the way, we saw this yesterday in Detroit. We had a bunch of college Republicans, and this is important to note because this is how the right works. Whenever you have like the college Republicans, and this actually works a little bit different than the college Democrats. The college Republicans have always been a farm team for the Republican Party. If you are leadership in the college Republicans, then you have somehow or another, by the way, worked yourself up by the ranks. And this is where people like, Roger Stone, Paul Manafort, and our old friend Karl Rove, this is where they cut their teeth and they learn like dirty politics. So all you got to do is give a ring-a-ding to the college Republicans. And all of a sudden they're like showing up, trying to break into places because they want these jobs and they are ambitious as hell. And so you start having a combination of the grassroots people and then these plants, right? These operatives. And then all of a sudden, that's how you get like the Brooks Brothers riot in 2000. That's how you got Detroit last night. I'm sure that's partly what happened in Arizona last night. Well, so you have all that stuff going together. All of a sudden, you have a bunch of billionaires and malevolent actors who see an opportunity to put their thumb on the scale. Chances are that in the next couple of days, we're going to see something along the lines of a Tea Party reopen movement, some sort of artificially constructed movement that is going to be a combination of grassroots actors, operatives chosen by the Republican Party, and also people who are being paid or funded or inspired by malevolent billionaires who are going to try and maintain control in this country. It's going to get weird. It's going to get really, really weird. And I think Joe Biden's going to win this, but I have to tell you that these people, and I've been warning people for months, maybe years. I can't remember when I started like sounding this one. He's not going to just accept defeat. That's just not going to happen. That's not who Donald Trump is. That's not who these people are. They are nearing the completion of a project that they have been carrying out for a long time. They're not going to just let it go. And I know a lot of people sort of like warmed themselves by the thought that Amy Coney Barrett being confirmed would mean that they would just back away and they'd be like, fine, we have this, we're totally fine. And maybe even they would offload Donald Trump because he's a problem. That's not how this works. That's not how this works. Because if they pulled this off and they managed to undermine this election, they can undermine any election. Because Donald Trump was beaten. And if they realize that they can win any election, whether they win it by actual votes or by intimidation and by violence, they're going to do that. So that's where we are. It's going to be weird over the next couple of days. And I keep telling people, you need to be ready. You need to be ready. And, you know, I keep saying, like, figure out where your line is in the sand. What is it that's going to put you into action? What's going to make sure that you go out and protest? Or, and I understand that not everybody can go out and protest, what's going to lead to you either helping to organize or, like, I don't know, sending pizza to people in the streets or whatever? What is it that's going to put you into action? Because this is not going to go quietly and simply. Derek, what does be ready mean? I would say, just have a plan. What can you do? How can you contribute? Whether or not it's organizing a protest, joining a protest, reaching out to some sort of organization that either provides support to people who will be out in the street or support for, everything from poll watchers, whatever. Find what you can do, because this is going to be a street fight. And you have a lot of people right now who are very, very invested in how this thing turns out. They're not going to go quietly. And Donald Trump is not simply going to roll over and say, that's true. I'm not very popular. I've lost this vote. Because again, it goes back to that cult mentality. The moment that your reality is contradicted and it's allowed to be contradicted, that's it. That's kind of, bedtime for Bonzo at that point. You just kind of lose your entire cult. You lose your entire ability to function within your chosen reality. So that's where we are. Again, I hope that I hope that we don't have to do this all the time. As much as I appreciate hanging out with you and drinking coffee, y'all are wonderful. You always are. I really hope that we can put this thing to bed and Joe Biden can just win this election and we can move forward and fight the necessary fights. Because, again, I keep saying it, defeating Donald Trump is only the beginning. There's a much, much, much bigger fight to come. Next few days are going to get weird. Do not for a second believe that any of these people who are showing up at the polls to intimidate or stop counts, do not for a moment think that they are somehow or another organic. These are going to be constructed, artificial, quote unquote, movements. Because the right does not have the numbers. The right is not actually populist, but the right cloaks itself in populism. It's not real. They need to create the illusion that there are more of them than other people. And in the next few days, that's going to be incredibly important for them in maintaining any sort of power or anything approaching viability. That illusion is absolutely integral to Trumpism and the Republican Party right now. All right, if you haven't already, Nick and I, for the Muckrake podcast, we recorded a special episode. It's available right now. We're going to record one today. It'll come out tomorrow. Maybe, I don't know. Things are happening so fast at this point that it's almost impossible to keep up with. But yeah, I appreciate y'all hanging out. I will do some of these here and there as necessary. Keep people informed, keep people focused on this stuff, and also talk about the things that people aren't talking about on the news, which they absolutely need to talk about. This artificial populism is absolutely just insidious and dangerous, and we're at a really kind of a crazy moment right now. There's a reason to be excited about what's happening with the election, and there's a reason to be excited about how the results are coming through and what they represent. But we're at a dangerous moment right now. It's the darkest hours before the dawn is where we're at. There's going to be a lot of desperation, a lot of weirdness. So yeah, absolutely. Mud Creek Podcast. We'll be releasing stuff as we go. I appreciate you all so much. One last swig of coffee for good luck. Be safe, okay? Be aware, be safe. Things are going to get weird. Be safe.